Let me start first of all by thanking the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I want to acknowledge Ikram Sehgal Sahab for his contributions towards business and public service in Pakistan, both here and in his capacity as a senior member of the Davos community. I'm also appreciating to be on a panel with Rashid Amjad Saab. He's a distinguished economist and we take whatever he says very seriously. Also, Moin Fudda Saab, you have a great career in finance, and I was fortunate to work with you during those transformational times when the privatization program was seen as a success. So I want to start first of all by saying that जब ये government आई, so there was a particular situation that was inherited, जो हमें विरसे में मिली, and there were some really bad signs in the economy, which was verging upon a crisis. So दो तीन चीजें जो I would like to share with you is that we had basically deficits of historic magnitude, both on the external front as well as the domestic front. And the historic failure of Pakistan in not being able to integrate with the world economy was on full display. Because in the past 5 years or even 10 years, the country had failed to generate export growth. और जो 5 साल गुजरे थे just before this government came in, the growth rate of exports was 0%, in fact was negative. And at the same time, a policy, a bizarre policy of trying to keep the dollar cheap was followed. And a lot of money was spent, a lot of foreign exchange was spent to try and preserve dollar at a cheaper level, which had a consequence both of depleting the foreign exchange reserves and at the same time allowing the import-export gap to become historically high, almost approaching $40 billion. And the current account deficit was also at its highest level at $20 billion. So we were staring at a situation where we had very limited capacity to earn dollars, and the small amounts of dollars that we had, they were diminished by about half in the last year of the previous government. So that was one side. And on the other, our fiscal deficits were also at a premium. And so the first task really was how to avoid a complete meltdown, how to avoid a potential default, and how to retrieve the situation. So a lot of important and bold decisions were taken. The first, was to galvanize support from the international community for our reform program. And for that, we were able to get the support of the IMF, which is the premier financial institution in the world. And once we got our agreement with them, we were able also to secure additional financing and for budgetary support from the IMF, following the IMF from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and of course, from bilateral sources. So that was the first, effort in which we succeeded to avert a crisis. At the same time, we had to take some tough decisions, which was to let the dollar find its value as the markets may determine, because we neither had the dollars to blow on this failed policy, nor did it make sense to try and discourage exports with the overvalued rupee. So we shifted the policy focus because historically Pakistan in 72 years one of its historic failures has been the inability to generate exports in a fundamental way. So we shifted the focus away from a free flow of all sorts of imports towards a policy of exports. And in that, we gave the business community a lot of incentives. We gave them subsidies on loans, subsidies on electricity, subsidies on gas, no taxes of any sort, and a refund regime so that they could go out and explore markets on somewhat, better terms. And because the rupee also had depreciated, it was a more conducive environment for exports. So this was a big step. The other big step we took was to be very aggressive in cutting government expenditures. So, and that was manifested both symbolically and substantively. Symbolically, we cut the salaries of the cabinet members. We cut the salary of other, senior officials. We froze the salaries of the secretaries and the generals. And at the same time, we tried to cut other government expenditures. The President House, the Prime Minister House, but at a more substantive level, we froze the military expenditures budget. We cut the entire civilian government's budget. And we also did not give a single supplementary grant throughout the entire year. So we said no to everybody for any money in addition to what was already budgeted. And that was tough, but it was maintained. And this expenditure management began to have a good result. And pre-corona, the revenue side, the tax side, was moving at a good pace of about 17% per year improvement. So we were headed for about 4.5 trillion, 4.7 trillion revenue collection before the coronavirus struck us. And a very important feature of this time was that we were able to have, first time in 20 years, a primary balance, which was a surplus rather than a deficit. And another very serious accomplishment at this time, again, was to pay back interest on borrowed loans. And you can get an idea of how much that burden was, that in the 2 years of this government, we have had to pay 5,000 billion rupees as interest payment for loans that were borrowed earlier. तो 5,000 अरब रुपए का सूद दिया गया इस गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से जो माजी के कर्जों की वजह से था पिछले 2 साल में. So we sustained that. We were able to generate the resources to do that. We were able to cut expenditures. We were able to raise taxes. We were able to bring the primary balance into a surplus. And because of our policy of trying to cut imports and increase exports, we have been able in the last 2 years to bring our current account deficit from 20 billion to only 3 billion. So, at the same time, we tried to mobilize our non-tax revenues. And the non-tax revenues, I'm happy to share with you, showed extraordinary growth. Over the budgeted figure was about 1.1 trillion, but we were able to achieve about 1.5, 1.6 trillion. So this is a historically high number and shows the resolve of the government to mobilize all avenues. अब आप देखें कि just before the coronavirus struck us, we were getting very good reviews. The IMF board called our program a big success, and we were fulfilling all our performance benchmarks. At the same time, Bloomberg was giving us good reviews and rating our stock market as one of the best in the world. The World Bank came out and listed us as amongst the top 10 performers for reducing the cost of doing business and making it easy to do business. So these were some of the big features of this government. Now, another area that remained a major area for the government, and I'll elaborate on that further, is that we decided, and this is a hallmark of the Prime Minister's approach to governance, that the people who are the least privileged, people who are the weakest, people who are the most desperately in need of support should be at the forefront. And that's why for our social safety net program, SARS program, we virtually doubled the budget in spite of an IMF program from 100 to 192 billion rupees. And we were able to reach tens of millions of people. Or just before the coronavirus, we were able to reach about 4.5 to 5 million people. And then after coronavirus, this number in fact went up to about 1.6. So where we have is a situation of reaching stability and creating a platform where others could come and participate in our economy, and foreign investment began to flow, the stock market began to go up, and other indicators were beginning to show signs of improvement. This is when coronavirus struck us. And of course, it can't be helped. It's a global phenomena. According to the IMF and World Bank, 4 to 5% of global GDP will be lost. Some countries will suffer even more. And you have all kinds of estimates about its impact on Pakistan. Clearly the lockdowns, clearly the uncertainty, the erosion in the international business space, all these had their impacts. And as a result of that, some of our achievements became diluted. Now, an important way to judge this government is how we responded to the coronavirus situation. I think that Pakistan, with its limited resources, has done a really good job in trying to benefit its business community and its citizens. So हमारा पहला जो goal था वो ये था कि coronavirus में our people should not suffer. And I think the first task was to ensure that our people, whether those who are poor, whether those who are in remote parts of the country, or whether those who have lost their jobs due to the lockdown, they must receive immediate injection of cash into their pockets. Or uske liye a big program of about 1.2 trillion, 1,240 billion, 1,240 billion stimulus package was prepared. And one of the central features of that was to get money into the hands of people who need it. और इसके लिए कोई 1,60,00,000 लोगों को 16 million families were given cash support of 12,000 rupees each, which means if every family is, consisting of roughly 6 people, then about 100 million plus or 10 crore लोगों को ये मदद दी गई. And I think that helped them sustain through this period. The other big feature of this stimulus package was that we should ensure that the liquidity problems of our businesses don't get converted into insolvency. that the problems our businesses, especially small and medium enterprise businesses, are tackled. Or during this time, we gave money for a variety of causes. First, if the principal payments were due of the loans, they were deferred for 1 year. If you were small or medium business enterprise, government agreed to pay your electricity bills for 3 months from its own pocket. If you needed money for maintaining your employees on your payroll, the government offered to give money at very low interest rates. If you wanted to, if you were a citizen and could not pay your bills, your electricity bills were postponed for 3 months. And this way about 1.3 million employees' jobs were protected through this Rozgar scheme, in which 2,200 businesses benefited. And about 1.2 million businesses were saved from shutdown by deferring 642 billion rupees of their principal that had become due. And the budget also reflected that general trend. We had zero customs duty on about 20,000 items to make it cheaper for our businesses to do business. We started a small entrepreneurship program, Kamyab Jawan program, in which about $1 billion has been approved, but that number can go up to 100 billion over a few years. We started a program in construction where we decided to give massive incentives to our business sector. We reduced the tax rates. We made them corruption-free by shifting them to a fixed tax regime. And we, for small, affordable Prime Minister programs, Naya Pakistan program, if any business comes forward and builds houses for the really small houses, then they would have a 90% discount in tax payments. So if your tax was going to be 1,000 rupees, it would be 100 rupees. And all that has been done to try and generate economic activity. And at the same time, we added 30 billion in the subsidies for this Naya Pakistan program. And we also said, okay, if anybody wants to build a small house, any Pakistani, then the government will pay for their mortgage beyond a small amount of 4 to 5%. So these are extraordinary measures that the government is taking to try and deal with the coronavirus and its impacts. So where are we now? How have we further managed to reduce the impact upon our citizens? Dekhein, is government ka jo mehvar hain, they are the people of Pakistan. They are the citizens of Pakistan. And I will share with you all the ways in which the government is trying to help them by listing some of the subsidies that we are giving to the citizens. Piछle 2 saal mein 250 billion were given to about 16 million families in cash alone. हमने 192 billion रखे to Qabaili ilaqo ke merged districts and 192 billion for the merged districts of the federally administered tribal areas. We have put 50 billion to subsidize 5 essential food products in the utility stores. We gave 15 billion to subsidize 19 food items for the holy month of Ramadan. We subsidized 72% of electricity users. We subsidized 90% of the domestic gas users. We are trying to subsidize fertilizer. In fact, we do subsidize gas for fertilizer production. to reduce the cost of fertilizer for our farmers. We subsidize 100% of tube well users in agriculture sector. And like I said, we are subsidizing low-cost housing. All these things are big measures to mitigate the current suffering that coronavirus and an adverse global environment has inflicted upon our citizens. Now, what's happening as we are entering into a new year? Our new year, fiscal year, starts on July 1. So I will share with you some of the emerging results and then talk a bit about the areas of reform before concluding. So we feel that the emerging situation has some rosy spots. They are, inshallah, the beginning of a new revival, if you want to call it, a rebound, or a upward movement along the trajectory of growth. Why do I say that? Because our exports have risen 6% in July. Our domestic cement sales have risen 33% to 4 million plus tons. Our cement exports have risen 66% to about 1 million tons. Our petrol and diesel consumption has increased between 10 to 15%. Our fertilizer sales have increased about 22%. Our motorbike sales have increased 31%. Our tractor sales have risen 17%. Our car sales are up. And our remittances have reached a historically high level at 2.8 billion. It has never been so high in any month in our previous history. And at the same time, we find that the FBR has collected 300 billion rupees in July, which is 23% higher than the internal target, and it's 8% higher than the same month last year. And this is getting recognized. You find that Moody's and Fitch have come out with favorable ratings. Bloomberg has appreciated the 40% plus growth in our stock market post, since Corona. And the foreign direct investment, which had been 88% higher compared to the previous period. So how we need to build upon it, obviously. And one way to really build upon it is to think in terms of reform areas. And I would share with you what I think might constitute reform and how we need to go forward. Look, the first thing is that the basic job of a government is to design the right incentives. A key component of reform is to design the right incentives so that the private sector and the citizens and the markets can get the right signals. And that's part of what we are doing, trying to get a good policy regime, trying to react to what is needed. So monetary policy was able to reduce its interest rate from 13 plus to 8% to give that motivation for people to borrow and to go towards contributing to growth. Similarly, on the fiscal front, we came out with a budget with no new taxes. We came out with massive tax exemptions. And we have tried to come out with subsidies which are focused. And this is the other part. While I listed some of the subsidies we are giving, we are very mindful that it's the public's money and it must reach the right people. So we have to target the subsidies in the right way. And we have to ensure that only the intended beneficiaries get it. So subsidy reform is another very important component. And in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about it. Now, The third element of reform is to respect institutional arrangements, to not interfere randomly, to not subvert the institutional authority. And you would have noticed that we are trying to do that. And the Central Bank, the State Bank of Pakistan, the Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan, the Competition Commission of Pakistan, they are all operating, and their areas of autonomy are being respected. And that is also the general approach that we have. Even when it came to the public sector development program, we were able to give autonomy to the ministries to spend the money that is targeted for them without cumbersome approvals from the finance ministry, as it used to happen in the past. So this is one important aspect of reform that is going on, which one can call institutional mandates, respect for institutional mandates. Then another very important component of institutional reform is to involve the private sector. And I think the privatization list has been expanded. The private-public partnership program is being expanded, and subcontracting of activities from government to the private sector is continuing. And then we have some set of perennial public sector corporations. We need to be aggressive, whether it's in the electricity sector, whether it's railways or airline or steel or whatever. And I think the combination of all these things will begin to give results and will begin to build upon the initial positive results that we are seeing. Do we have challenges? Of course. Do we have areas where our performance can be improved? Of course. And I'm happy to talk about them in the Q&A. I feel this is the unique time in Pakistani history where we have a leader who wants to do things based on merit. And we have a set of democratic arrangements which are in place. And everyone, all the governments, all the other primary institutions are trying to operate within their constitutionally given mandates. And I think because the people of Pakistan are at the center of this government's agenda, we can do a lot, inshallah, and we will be trying to do that.